Escape from Plan A.
Escape, escape, escape.
From Plan A.
Welcome to a new episode of Escape from Plan A. This is your host, Teen. I've got Diana with me. Diana, how's it going?
It's pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm good. And a very special guest, Carl Zha, who's joining us all the way from Haining in China. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Carl, I follow you on Twitter. I always love potting with like interesting people I see on Twitter doing interesting stuff. You run a super interesting podcast, the type where I think the last episode I saw was, you're like interviewing like foreign volunteer soldiers fighting ISIS, stuff like this. Really crazy stuff. You want to tell us a little bit about your podcast and kind of what, just kind of plug anything that you're working on?
Oh, yes.
Let the people know who you are.
Thank you. Thank you for that opportunity. And thank you for inviting me to your show. My podcast is called Silk and Steel Podcast. It's very simple, Silk and Steel. Or you can search, you can either search for it on Google, Silk and Steel Podcast, or search my name, Carl Zha. Carl spelled with a C, and then my last name, Z-H-A, that's Zebra, Henry, Apple. And
yeah, we'll put links and everything in the show notes for you.
Yeah, and my podcast is intended to be China focused, but also cover everything, all the countries that's involved with China. That's why I came up with the name Silk and Steel. And primarily, right now, my primary focus is China and the countries along the Silk Road. I basically cover whatever topic that's interesting to me, and my most recent episode is actually my Tiananmen memories. So I did a reverse format where I invited a former guest to interview me about my memory as a 13-year-old in China in 1989 and my experience in the student protest of that time. And I welcome everyone to check out my show. I have a lot of the content is free, open to public. There's some subscriber only content, but that there's about like one per month. But there's a lot of free stuff. So please feel free, have a listen. I promise it's going to be very interesting stuff.
Yeah, I really like your historical perspectives. I've read through a bunch of your tweets and I just feel like I learned a lot. Like, where did you get that information? Because like I can't find it anywhere.
Thank you. I have always been a history nerd. I remember when just right before I started school, my dad bought me a chart. It's like the dynasty chart that map out all the Chinese dynasties from the beginning till the present, and basically that chart stayed on top of my bed, and every day I wake up I will look at it and try to memorize it, and then my dad bought me this children book called 上下五千年, literally up and down 5,000 years. And it's just stories from Chinese history from the past. And so from a very young age, I just became very interested in history. When I was growing up in China, most of knowledge I learned is, just book knowledge, right? Like, I sometimes I take a lot of the history that's been written literally. But like later, as I came to the United States, as I grew older, I realized history is a lot of perspectives, right? You really have to read multiple sources, compare notes. It's almost like detective work, right? Because each historians in the past, they always write from a certain standpoint. and they might have their own biases. And really, to understand a historical event that happened, you want to do your own homework. You want to do a lot of it's like totally detective work. You have to go find, compare multiple sources, compare notes, and then you have to use your own judgment to figure out like a narrative for yourself. So that stuff is just like catnip for me. So I love it.
I think you had said, if I remember, maybe like in an earlier podcast that you did, that a lot of this, you had talked about this issue of perspectives, and in particular, I think when you had moved to the United States,
yes,
where you still live. I mean, just to be clear, you're on a sort of like extended vacation in China right now, visiting for the first time in a while, right?
Yeah.
But I think you had said when you moved to the United States that you were, I don't know if dismayed is the right word, or surprised by how little awareness or even attention was paid to China.
Yes.
And that, it really, you were really hungry to find any sort of mention or even sign of awareness in U.S. media of China. And so you became really expert at hunting down
yes.
Mentions of China in the newspapers and stuff like that. And that, can you tell us a little bit more about just, that experience? And
yeah, so I came to this country in 1990, basically 1 year after the Tiananmen Square protests. And I came here as a 13-year-old. I started 8th grade here. And while I was in U.S., I was always fascinated about how Americans see China, because it offers a really fresh perspective. And as I try to find more materials, I realized, at least in media, there's really little coverage back in 1990. I mean, at the time, for a while, I delivered newspaper. I delivered New York Times, and I would be reading NYT every day, and I will be looking through the pages to look for any kind of China-related story. And there's just not that much back in 1990, because at then, the only China story you have is maybe related to human rights, and even that is very little. And also I feel the pictures a lot of Americans have of China back then is very outdated. I mean, the picture many Americans have of China is still like from late 19th century, where men have these blues a Q and or the 1960s and 70s when everyone in China wears a Mao jacket, right? It's kind of very stereotypical view. But then that changed around, I think it's around the Olympics, the 2008 Beijing Olympics. And after that, it also coincided with the Great Recession in the United States. And then the perception almost like switched to the other side. It was like, oh my God, now China is going to take over the world. China is going to eat our lunch. What are we going to do? I mean, there's a lot more China coverage now, obviously, simply because China is a lot more important on the international stage. It has become a lot more powerful country, both economically and politically on the world stage. But, there's still, what I noticed, there's still, it's almost like a constructed media narrative when we come to the China coverage. I know before I noticed that. I mean, this might not just be limited to China, because I used to follow this expat magazine called Exile that was based out in Moscow. They talk about the U.S. Media coverage of Russia, and I recognize a lot of the same symptoms. It's almost like there's a template on reporting foreign countries like Russia or China, right? Like, first is everything has to tie back to communism, right? Even in Russia's case, the Soviet Union dissolved back in 1992. 20, 30 years later, when you read Russia reporting, it's always goes back to Soviet Union. And in China, you will somehow trace back to Mao or Cultural Revolution or Tiananmen 1989, right? It seems China has changed so drastically in last 30 years. Just since the time I left China from 1990, today's China is a totally different country, there's still a lot left to be desired in the media reporting of China. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think on the good end of that, at least in my eyes, is sort of like this rabbit in the hare parable of the U.S. having fallen asleep, the Chinese having done, and these are good stories about China, right? Mm-hmm. Is China, put an incredible amount of effort into growing the economy. The U.S. kind of fell asleep at the wheel, but it's still fundamentally I guess an antagonistic or adversarial mm-hmm. type of reporting, right, to say we're in a race together,
right?
And sort of at the bad end are stories that sort of highlight the ways in which China as a civilization is simply incompatible. These are 1.3 billion people that simply don't care about freedom.
Right.
They're not allowed to be exposed to any of the truths. They're cut off from the rest of the world by the Great Firewall.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, though, through the entire spectrum is this assumption of an adversarial relationship.
Yes.
And, even for me as a Chinese American, my parents are from China, eventually that narrative starts to work on you. Mm-hmm. As resistant as I feel to that, it's hard for me to think of China as anything but adversarial at this point.
Yes.
Because there's just so little in the way of the sort of like light. How do I put it? Like a sort of more
a counter narrative.
Yeah, counter narrative, and also just a slightly different attitude. The one about just sort of like curiosity,
sure,
or trying to find some sort of shared cultural space. Mm-hmm. Being as there's a lot of similarities between the two countries. Yeah. Do you think that that's kind of one side? This is what I'm curious about. Do you find that's kind of one-sided, or do you feel now that you've been in China for a few months that that's kind of the same story in China too? Is it also seen as this adversarial over there?
So it's a little bit more complicated over here in China because when we talk about Chinese people, right? We have to recognize there's literally 1.3, 1.4 billion of them, and you probably get 1.4 billion different opinions when you ask a Chinese person. And from talking to my dad's classmates and friends who are of an older generation, and talking to younger people like my younger cousins, I sense there might be a generation difference as well, because my dad's friends, for example, they're all being educated during the days of Cultural Revolution. They were college students during days of Cultural Revolution. They have experienced a Great Famine when they were in high school, and then Cultural Revolution in college, and then later they experienced the opening and reform of China. They witness the breadth of changes in China. Many of them are surprisingly I would say, even pro-American. That they're not. I don't sense any of them hold any kind of grudge against the United States. On the contrary, many of them remember the American aid to China during World War II, right? Whereas in a younger generation, people tend to be more patriotic or nationalistic, however you term it, and they do see U.S. as more of a kind of a bully that's trying to block the China's rise to power, because they have a different experience. These people who grew up after 90s, they experience a China that's just that's growing wealthier and more powerful, and they see their lives being improving steadily. So they have a total different experience of China and with the government, and also versus the United States, because like I said, like back in 1990, U.S. hasn't paid that much attention to China, but that has changed in more recent years, especially after 2000. Like you say, it's now, especially in U.S. media, it's often taken granted that it is an adversarial relationship. Because I just read a New York Times report. There's a New York Times reporter who shall remain unnamed, and he did a long Twitter thread on the current reporting on Elaine Chao, on her family ties with China. And
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I went through the entire thread, and I realized, okay, I'm not conservative, I'm not Republican, but I was trying to go through the thread on the quote unquote corruption of Elaine Chao, and the whole thread was about her basically spending $6,000 purchasing a ticket on Air China when he could flew a U.S. airline. And I was like, that's it? I mean, I was expecting more. And then I read that he started another Twitter thread, I think yesterday, and it was about Elaine Chao's family. Basically, he traced Elaine Chao's parents. They own some kind of shipping company that's registered in Hong Kong. And Elaine Chao was stand to inherit basically a huge chunk of money from them. And the moral of the story was actually, it was much easier to trace the corporate structure in a Chinese company on their Chinese filing than tracing the corporate structure of an American corporation that's incorporated in America, right? But I'm like, so how does that? So Elaine Chao was born with a silver spoon, but that's it. I mean, but at the end, what really stood out to me was this reporter said in one of his thread that we really need to ask the question, why Elaine Chao flew on Air China, an airline from an adversarial power. And I'm like, really?
Wow.
Yeah, really?
That's crazy.
Adversarial power? Are we even at war with China right now? I mean, I know there's a trade war, okay, but that's just whatever. But adversarial power, it's like, when did we, that's kind of the crazy atmosphere we're in right now.
Yeah, my take on it is, I mean, this is my, and that for that story, it might be illustrative, but I think that the problem in the U.S. is that, when you have two parties, the way we do, each party's always trying to look tougher than the other, and when it comes to the sort of xenophobic and sort of like adversarial posturing, each party tries to outdo the other. So if Trump is going to get tough on China, his opponents are going to get even tougher.
Yes.
And they're going to say, "Oh, you're tough on China, but your own cabinet member is flying Air China. How about that?"
Yep.
Like something stupid like that.
And she has ties to China. Oh my God! I mean, I don't know when that became like a crime. I mean, it's like I don't know. What can you say? Because Elaine Chao is this rich conservative Republican who is married to
Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, to a white person. I mean, Is that enough? Like, I mean,
Not just any white person, the Senate minority leader.
yeah, and you are still
majority
implying
leader, sorry,
she's
yeah.
some kind of commie spy, you know, like a fifth columnist.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, this is getting ridiculous. But unfortunately, that's kind of the atmosphere we're in right now. And I appreciate that you are running this podcast, though, so at least we get some of the Asian American voice out here. You know, that's enough of my rant. Back to you.
Yeah, no, it is frustrating because I feel like this might be a little bit of an aside, but I do think for Asian American journalists, we're just amateur podcasters doing it for fun. But for those who do it for a living, I think often they are sort of enlisted to the extent that they do even cover China. Mm-hmm. They're enlisted to sort of lend a certain credence to. What I would gather is an American and a mostly white perspective, but having like an Asian face sort of, sort of launders it a little bit. It's a bit frustrating.
Yeah, that's funny because I was so recently, because there's just a few days ago, right? There was a 30 years anniversary of Tiananmen Square protest. So there was a lot of coverage of that in the media. And one of the things they do is reporting on how people inside China don't even know about Tiananmen Square, and I thought that was such an idiotic thing to say because I'm in China. I'm involved with all the WeChat circles. All the people in the WeChat circles knew about Tiananmen Square incident. And like I don't know how they. So there were actually some Chinese Americans or Chinese person who work for the Western media who kind of challenged that narrative on Twitter. And I remember one person wrote, sometimes the Chinese voices have been delegitimized because they were always seen as being brainwashed by their own government, right? But we sometimes need to pay attention to those voices, even if they were, nationalistic or whatever. But then immediately another Western reporter jumps out and says, but isn't it true that Chinese government censored the media? I mean, yes, but that's not the point. The point is, you can't just dismiss the voice of ordinary Chinese just because their government censors the media. And especially in this time of age when plenty of Chinese inside China use VPN to get out. I mean, sometimes I'm amazed. I go to some YouTube video, like some Chinese TV drama that's also on YouTube, and I look at the comments, I'm like, this is amazing. All these people came from China. They're making comments on why. I don't even understand that. Like, why do they even need to go over the firewall to YouTube to watch a Chinese TV drama when they're totally available inside China, right? But there they are. They're making comments leaving comments on YouTube, and so these are the sides of the stories that's kind of rarely been reported about in American media. And people, unless you are in the know, right? Most Americans probably not even aware of that.
Yeah, Diana and I have talked about this before, where TikTok, the app that's really popular in China, that's a little bit like Vine.
Yes.
And Chinese users of TikTok have become really quite clever in coming up with funny videos that go viral.
Yes.
And if you see it on an American, predominantly, it's not strictly American, but a predominantly American site, like Reddit, where a lot of these TikTok videos get posted, what I've noticed in the comments is that a lot of Redditors will say stuff like, do they really think that we don't know this is fake? How could they think that people believe this really happened? And it was like, no. It's ironic. I think Chinese people understand that was set up. You realize that Chinese people do have a sense of irony too. It's like this weird it just shows me that there is to me there's quite a bit of racism in those comments.
Yeah.
That's unintentional. Like they're betraying a certain kind of racism where they simply can't attribute things like ironic humor.
There's a lot of ignorance
to Chinese people.
Yeah, there's a lot of ignorance. I mean, I actually tweet a lot of these viral Chinese TikTok videos on my Twitter feed, and I remember at one point I was being accused of a communist agent. One of the person that accused me said, he must have a team of like the Chinese intelligence officers feeding him like these steady stream of manufactured funny meme videos to upload on Twitter. And he said that unironically. I'm like, oh my god, and you never heard of TikTok? I mean, God, how can you like, and this is a guy that leave comments on all China related topic. I'm like, how do you even like start? Like, you don't even know the basics, like, if you don't know about Chinese TikToks, how can you? It's just mind blowing.
It's like a fundamental dehumanization, right? Like they're basically saying that Chinese people, they're just like empty vessels. Yep. They're not even robots. They're just like surrogate bodies for the Chinese media to input whatever they want, and then they just respond. And it goes like to so many levels, and it's like, if they have any agency, it's to be sneaky to the West.
Yes.
Like, that's what the videos are implying. Like, one, they don't have the capacity for humor, and two, they're posting it to trick us white people.
And that's a funny part, because most of the videos, they are, made for Chinese audience, right?
It's not for you. It's fuck you. It's not for you. And they think everything is for them because they're the center of the world. It's like, you're an idiot. Do you realize how stupid you are?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's, it's real hard to argue with people like that. I mean, I just laugh. I mean, there's literally nothing you can do with that kind of mentality. That's another reason I decided to run my podcast. Is because I feel it is important to get our voice out. And I love to talk about Chinese history, because I feel like it's important to understand the historical perspective to understand where China has come from and how it became what it is today. And a lot of that, like, people have to understand when sometimes people talk about China this, China that. Look, China is not Minnesota, okay? It's like. China has come from a much chaotic, backward place, and it was not easy like during that journey. And you cannot compare it to United States after 100 years of development. And the people, I think another reason is that people who usually comment on China, they probably don't have any other experience in other like third world nations, other than they probably only have experience in the West and China. And if you have been to a lot of other developing countries, you might understand why sometimes the way is they are in China. Sometimes you may find things frustrating or whatever, but like you said, China was not made for you. It's not made for white people. It's a people of Chinese. It's a country of the Chinese people.
I think there needs to just be a little bit more good faith. I think, and a lot of it's driven by geopolitics, because the Americans tend to be a lot more interested and curious about Japan.
Mm-hmm.
and Japan is an ally is a strong ally of America, and the same goes for South Korea as well. I think Americans are super curious about South Korea and South Korean people, and there's just a lot more sort of like good faith,
K-pop helps.
curiosity there.
Yeah.
What's that?
K-pop helps.
K-pop
too.
helps, yeah. K-pop, but underwriting all of it is I think a media complex that quite is often quite in sync with our government.
Yeah.
And,
definitely. I mean, even
and so you don't see coverage, say, of like, there's almost never any mention of the fact that, say, Japan has a very far right government.
Yes.
There's not really a lot of talk about that aspect, or we don't really talk about the military dictatorship or the Gwangju riots in Korea the way we talk about Tiananmen, because we were allied with that government, with the dictatorship in Korea. So I think there really is a selective focus that's driven by geopolitics, which is unfortunate. And for me as an American, I guess I would say that I do hold hope that American people are capable of that good faith, curiosity. It's just that the political climate doesn't allow for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my experience of living in U.S. for last 30 years is that most American people are just like people all over the world, right? They live their own lives. They're busy. They don't have time to learn about world events, and sometimes they are just being misled by the media. I mean, most common Americans, they don't hold grudges against China. There's really not. I do not detect any deep-held animosities toward China or Chinese among common Americans. I mean, there's ignorance.
Really? I hear it all the time. All the time.
Really?
I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a gender thing or because I grew up in the Midwest, but just like everywhere you hear it, from liberals, from conservatives, like young people, old people. Holy shit. Like one time I had a therapist and I was just like talking to him about like problems I had with my dad, and all of a sudden he just goes, I bet like, this was at MIT, he was like, I bet like at least 10% of the students here from China are spies.
Holy shit.
I was like, what is that about? Like,
yeah.
What does that even, what does that have to do with anything?
Yeah.
You fucking asshole.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, it's just like everyone all the time.
Yeah, I think there's the media is very large part responsible for that, and because even in the case of Korea that you guys mentioned earlier, I don't know if you noticed, whenever nowadays we talk about tensions between United States and North Korea, there's very little mention of South Korea and an opinion of South Korean people, because there's a lot of attacks in the media against the peace process with North Korea. But what doesn't get mentioned in English press is a majority of South Koreans support the peace process. They elected a president who is pro peace process with North Korea, but that part was never covered in U.S. media. When the media talked about it, it seems like there's only U.S. and North Korea, like almost like South Korea does not exist. I mean, talking about client state, don't make it too obvious, but. Yeah. Yeah.
You can see. I think you can see remnants of this. I guess I've been on this. Like when the therapist said that thing about spies. I mean, I think that is a great example of how the media, I think, does. I mean, how would he come up with that idea other than he's seeing and reading that everywhere?
Exactly.
I think. I think that it is driven. It's a top-down sort of thing, and as an example, like right now there's a huge. There's a huge thing going on in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Right. There's just a huge demonstration
Protest.
against these extradition laws, and if you were in the U.S., you would see how big a story this is here, which is strange. I don't know what vested interest we have in extradition laws in Hong Kong, but it is absolute. And look, I'm not taking sides. I claim ignorance about
Sure.
what was agreed in 1997 or whatever.
Yeah.
All I know is that I'm not sure why Americans are so vested in the extradition rights of the people in Hong Kong.
By
And
Americans, you mean
but
the
it-
United States government
Yeah, of course, exactly.
and the media. Yes.
But you see an incredible amount of priority given to the story, and it happened, I think, probably like maybe 3 to 4 years ago during the Umbrella Revolution. Quote, the Umbrella Revolution, which was not a revolution, but they gave it the name Umbrella Revolution to sort of fit it into this narrative of various regimes that had been toppling.
Yeah.
And again, huge amount of priority given to that in terms of coverage, which is okay. That's okay. But if you compare that to the almost like total lack of interest in a much larger protest that was happening in Seoul, in Korea, at the same time as the Umbrella Revolution, which was successful and which actually did end up overturning the government, and which probably in terms of like geopolitical importance to the U.S. was much bigger deal, because that kind of paved the path for Moon Jae-in to come into
Yep.
power. That led directly to the renewed peace process that was going on. That was a much bigger story for us as Americans, but we paid very little attention to it, I think, because we supported Park.
Yeah.
We supported that government that was toppled in that. So I think that's how I read a lot of the coverage now.
Yeah, or something even closer. There's the yellow vest protest in France.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like
Yeah,
that
for
is
sure.
That's a
huge,
great example.
and that was ongoing for a long time. And there's a very little coverage in English media on that. I mean, this is France we're talking about. This is not some third world nation. and
Yeah, and I think most of the coverage that I saw was on your Twitter thread when you were like, "Why isn't anybody posting about
Yeah.
this?"
yeah, I mean, seriously.
That's a great example. And, if you go to something like RT.Russia Today, RT.com, it's the complete opposite story. They'll cover nothing but the Paris protests.
Yeah, I mean that's why now they're going after RT, right? I mean, like RT found a niche basically by offering like a kind of alternative media in United States, and now they're have to try to shut down RT by forcing them to list as foreign agent. But I mean, like, instead of admitting, okay, maybe there's a problem with our reporting, but anyway, so I really like to move beyond the rant about American media and rather talk about what I have seen in China. My trip.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would.
for
I do
sure.
too, because it's a rabbit hole, and you must have a great data plan, because you've got a lot of videos posted onto Twitter, which are amazing. I feel like I'm on vacation with you, and you've got these great, you got great food videos.
Yes.
I think the stuff I enjoy the most is when you kind of find those sort of like traditional courtyard houses,
Yes.
those 四合院, that style of houses, and you'll kind of just walk around and showing the sort of like older and more
Traditional.
how do I want to say it? There's an image of China here that's very cyberpunk, like just massive cities, neon lights, and 30 million people all crammed into 2 square kilometers. But the side of China that you're showing is a much more sort of laid-back, pastoral experience. And is that kind of what you're living out there? Is that what you're feeling?
Yeah, I mean, China is such a large country. I mean, both exist. I mean, there's both the cyberpunk megacities, and there's these idyllic, almost empty old old towns that's populated most by old folks. And I love to explore both. Just lately that, I mean, in my dad's hometown, I try to get some exercise after, binge eating delicious Chinese food. And so I've been bicycling all around the outskirts of Hailing, and they have a lot of these old towns in the surrounding area where the young people have all moved into the city for better pay and better opportunities. But then they got these all these really old 100-year-old houses that's either preserved. There's some renovation effort. They're trying to preserve some of them, but they're just some of them just kind of left in their in their pristine condition, and I just love to visit because it's not crowded by hordes of tourists, and I can take my time, and you've seen all the videos, and speaking of data plan, one thing I have this. I got a new SIM card from China Mobile, and then I'm paying 100 yuan, right? Which is what it's less than 20. It's less than 20 US dollars. And you give me 20 G. But everywhere I go in China, restaurants, bus stations, they all have Wi-Fi. They all have free Wi-Fi you can hook into. So I make full advantage of that. I'm not. One thing I do complain, of course, is the Great Firewall, because it does slow down the data transmission when you have to use a VPN, right? So yes, I'm in China. Yes, I can actually post from China because I'm using a VPN, and so it takes a little time, but with a little patience, and I do want to share these videos and my travel experiences with my Twitter followers, because I think that's the side of China many people are not talking about right now.
Yeah, I was in China late last year. I went to Guangzhou and Chengdu, and I'd not been to China since 2003.
Wow.
Something a long time ago.
It's changed.
And so I went, and it has changed. I'd never been to Guangzhou before, and Guangzhou is on that list of megacities, mm-hmm. right? It is one of those
first tier cities.
Yeah, and it has a reputation, I think, to the extent that people even know it, but being kind of like a Shenzhen style city, yep. and kind of But I was actually really shocked by sort of how laid back the town was, mm-hmm. and it has sort of an older part of town where you've got a lot of hipsters.
Yep.
I was like, whoa, there's straight up hipsters in China,
yeah.
and they're opening up. I was like, I did not expect to see the things I was seeing there, and I remember I was staying in an Airbnb sort of in the older part of town. And which is, of course, where all the hipsters are drawn to. They're always drawn to sort of the more traditional part of the city and all that. They eschew all the modernists. And there was this coffee bar where I had to go get my key and everything. And I walk in, and it's all just sort of vintage American electronics. Very strange theme. And I was like, I wonder if this is in the U.S. where someone will do a kitschy Soviet-themed coffee bar, with Sputnik posters, something like that. They had all these Apple Macintosh posters from the 1980s and stuff. And then I was just talking to some of the younger people there, and total just a side to urban life in China that is more or less ignored or unknown.
Yeah,
I don't know, but
one thing,
do you feel like it's because you don't live and work there that you're able to experience that? And because like if I visit New York, I will see that too and be like, wow, New Yorkers are so laid back. Like, you know,
I never got that. I never got that impression.
3 p.m.
But I was, though, I will say that I was there with my girlfriend who grew up there, and she has a lot of friends that are from there. And let me tell you, they're working people, and they're pretty laid back. They were they were taking me there, you know.
Okay, cool.
It is. I think it was. I think it was overall not quite as frenetic, and let's put it this way: it didn't feel like Tokyo. Tokyo did feel to me like a very rushed, harried, kind of New York City style place. And maybe that's the case in Beijing as well. You know, China's, like you said, Carl, like China's a big ass country, and there's a lot of regional differences. And so if I talk about Guangzhou, that's not China at large. But it is China, and it is a side to China that I think tends to escape the sort of Western gaze, and you know, we're not really looking for that, which I find kind of sad, because culturally it's way more interesting for me as an American than, you know, sort of all the sort of the more bleak imagery that we're getting, you know, dominated by super hardworking, you know, tech people or dour, grim government types, you know, in Beijing or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
It just misses out a lot on Chinese life. Let's put it that way. You know, the livelihood of China.
Yeah. That's for sure. Because one other thing I really want to say is that when I went back to China on like 9-year intervals. I left China in 1990. The first time I went back was 2001. So around the time that your last visit. And then I went back again in 2010. So my last 2 visits back to China, you know, immediately I see the pace of development. I mean, like if you go back to China every 9 years, it's like a new country. But both times, what I felt was China was a great place to visit. It was developing fast, but I would never see myself actually, like, say, move back to live there for a long extended period of time, because, you know, there's pollution and there's environment problems, there's all other stuff like convenience of life, right, that we take for granted in the West. But this time, you know, 2019, going back to China, I found that China had become a lot more livable place. And that's really the biggest difference I found, was that there was a serious effort made into clean up the environment. The first thing I noticed when I landed in China was, oh my God, what happened? Why did this place become so clean? and that was not just in one place, because I traveled quite a bit in China. I first flew back to my hometown, Chongqing, which is a mega city in southwest China. And then from there, I flew to Yunnan, to Mangsi, which is right on the border with Myanmar, a very small provincial city. And now I'm on the East Coast in Zhejiang, Haining, which is also a kind of smallish, medium-sized city between Hangzhou and Shanghai. And all the towns that I travel in between, everywhere I went, even countryside, it cleaned up. I was like really surprised. I bicycled to like this small Chinese village on the outskirts of Haining City, and it's clean. I mean, like, it's just amazing. It's like nothing like the rural China I remember from 1990. I mean, like there's also they have been a lot of investment to put up parks, public parks, right? And it just made the whole place seem a lot more livable. Like it's a lot. It's like a place I can see myself, you know, easily just settle down and live for an extended period of time.
Yeah, I saw that thing about the greening of the planet in China and India. It's like they just like planted so many trees in the last 20 years that it actually, like, you can see it from space. Like, those two countries are making the planet more green. And I was wondering if that, if that's a signal of a developing country becoming a developed country, is like better living conditions, better quality of life, and like production of hipsters.
I don't know about production of hipsters, but I think there's definitely a more awareness. I think you are definitely right that it's part of this country getting more wealthier, so the life's priorities are different now, right? The Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First you got to take care of getting enough to eat, and now that people have that, they want a better lifestyle and they want better environment. They demand better air. One thing I noticed is like now they're pushing out all the polluting factories outside of the city limits. From Beijing, Shanghai, and even city like median city like Hailin, they have pushed the polluting city to the outskirts. And another thing is they have invested a lot more to clean up the environment. You have all these team of grandmas and grandpas. I saw them in their little electric tricycles every morning. They just drive around and then clean up the street, and that's how they keep the place so clean, because these
That's great.
Yeah, this team of grandmas. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a big point. This is a total aside. I just want to get this out there because this pisses me off to no end. Is like, we talk a lot. Like, one of the big differences is, you go to, and it's not even just China. I think this is more like the U.S. being the weird one out. Is like, if I go to my subway station here in New York City, and I go downstairs, first of all, it's a freaking mess. Like, it's disgusting. And the reason it's disgusting is because there's nobody working at that train station. Literally, there's not a single employee of the city that's actually working in that train station. It's like the honor system, basically. And the honor system yields terrible results. And if you go to... I don't even think China is special in this regard. I think most other countries, that run a subway, you'll have at least 8 to 10 people, running. I know every subway station in China that I was at had at least 5 or 6 security guards, security people. When you get down to the platform, there's people there to give you information. There's people to manage the platform, make sure the lines are straight. There's people picking up trash. All these people have jobs. And then I go to my train station, and it's just crickets. There's nobody there. And I don't know. I'm just making an observation because it's just a huge sore point for me.
Yeah,
that we just refuse to employ people.
That actually reminded me. So there's another big drive in China to build out the public bathrooms, right? Because China's bathroom have this reputation of being extra nasty, right? So what I noticed this time, 2019, is I walk around to this tourist site and I see these beautifully constructed buildings, and they're just bathrooms, public bathrooms, and so some of them are really well done. Have traditional architecture or just some really modern looking, and then you're like, oh, what is this? Oh, it's a bathroom, and you walk in, they have names of people who are responsible for that bathroom with their pictures on the wall.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. That's next level stuff,
Yeah. No, it's true. They have those in Europe too. I've been to a lot of European cities, and maybe not a photo of the person, but there's an attendant who's supposed to be responsible for cleaning it. They have to sign in when they cleaned it and signature and everything, and they're nice.
It's unthinkable here.
Yeah, it would be unthinkable to walk into a train station or a public bathroom in Berlin and see the shit that you see in New York.
Yeah. No, I will say though that I was at a relatively fancy dim sum restaurant, and it's like in a very modern building, and everything's really fancy. And then I went to go use the bathroom, and traditional squat toilet, dude smoking, and I'm like, hey, I'm in China. It's a nice reminder, Yep, still in China. Yeah. Yeah, I really missed that trip. How much longer are you going to spend out there? I feel like when you said, "Oh, I could see myself living here," I'm like, "Yeah, you're living there already." What are you talking about?
I'm actually probably going to be here for a few more months. I planned out this trip to be an extended trip. I wasn't even planning to stay in my dad's hometown this long. The only reason I have been here for over a month now is because my dad decided to extend his trip. I didn't even know my dad was coming to China because I was going to China to do the water festival in Yunnan near the border with Myanmar. And then my dad's like, oh, by the way, I'm in China. I'm like, oh, okay, great, we can meet up. And then my dad, he has a bad ankle, and he's in United States. The doctor wants him to do surgery. And so he's really scared of surgery. And so he put that off a year with like a swollen ankle. And finally, he came to China to have my uncle look at it. My uncle was a practitioner of Chinese medicine. And I have to be honest, I was always a skeptic of traditional Chinese medicine. I mean, and so was my uncle, it turns out, because I was talking to him about how he first started learning Chinese medicine from my grandfather. He said, yeah, it's like, when I first started, I'm like, this is the age when we're splitting atoms. Traditional Chinese medicine? What is this voodoo stuff? But he eventually, overcome his, and start learning from my grandpa. And what I have seen with my own eyes, I was really impressed with the result, his treatment on my dad's ankle, because like my dad's ankle was like a grapefruit when he first arrived in China like a month ago, and now it's almost like he now he doesn't have to walk around with a cane anymore. I mean, that is just amazing. Like the swollen has gone down. So my uncle made me a believer. I mean, like maybe not everything in Chinese medicine, but now I know at least for something traditional Chinese medicine does work.
It better. I mean, because I've taken it. I've had TCM prescribed to me, and it tastes really bad. It's really, really difficult to ingest. It is not for fun. It's not. It's not like it's not for taste. So there better be some efficacy. Yeah. Well, that's good. It's good to hear that your dad's ankle is no longer the size of a grapefruit, and maybe you guys can do some more stuff together.
Yeah, well, he's going back to U.S. in about a week, but that's why I've been staying kind of stationary last month just to keep my dad company. But after that, I'm going to resume my plan to explore more of China. My next destination will probably be Guangzhou, because I have a friend living down there, and we'll see what we can do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Have you been there before?
No, I've never been to Guangzhou. I mean, I lived I grew up in Chongqing, right, which is in southwest China. Yeah. When I was very little, I would just go with my parents to see my grandma who lived on the east coast of China, right, next to Shanghai. So we would just take a boat down the Yangtze River, and sometimes take the train back. So I have been to China basically along that west-east axis, along the Yangtze River Valley. And 2010 was the first time I actually went to Beijing and, the north. And it was that was because my one of my younger cousins got married in the city next to Beijing, in Tianjin. So I got to see the Forbidden City, the Great Wall. It's very different. Like sometimes I don't think about it, but I conceptually understood North China is a big place, and North and South is very different. But once I'm there, I experience it. So I at the time I dated a girl from she grew up in Inner Mongolia, but her family was from Henan, right? So I was telling her a story of then my roommate who was a white American, and he went to Philippines to visit his girlfriend's family in Philippines, and he came back and complained to me. He said, "Did you know in Philippines they eat rice every meal of the day? You know, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?" I was like, dude, that's like just normal. You know, I was just normal in East Asia. So I thought that was a pretty funny story. And I told this girl I was dating from northern China. She's like, wow, eating rice every meal? That is kind of excessive. And I was looking at her, was like, what? Are you Chinese? And then I realized, oh yeah, because from her part of the country, they eat more noodles, you know, like they, you know, the rice is not grown in the north. The rice is grown in the south, south of the Yangtze River.
Yeah. You eat like breads and noodles for breakfast at least.
Yeah. So so that's why I realized, oh, okay, yes, there's that regional difference.
Well,
there.
people from Chongqing, they just eat hot pot for everything. That's all they do. And you know, there's a hot pot sort of craze going on in the U.S.
Yes.
At least here in New York, it's like everywhere. The Americans, they even like the mala style火锅, you know, the spicy, numbing spice style.
No way.
And I like it. I've always liked it.
You know, like.
And then when I went to, when I went to Chengdu, which is close to Chongqing, same province, right? Yeah. I was like, ooh, hot pot, you know, home of hot pot. I can't eat hot pot. It's eating hot pot in America is very different from eating hot pot in Sichuan province. They enjoy watching you suffer. They know you're not from there. They know you ordered incorrectly. They know you can't handle what you just, you know. And they're just watching you, and they're like, yeah, look at this guy. Look at him try.
Well, you know they have those yin yang
different level.
hot pot where like half is spicy, half is non-spicy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really hanging out in the non-spicy part because it's a totally different level of spice.
Yes.
I didn't realize what we were dealing with here, and I'm pretty good with. I thought I was pretty good with spicy. And then, you know, I was talking to our driver as I was leaving, and he was, you know, I was telling him about this problem that I had. He was like, oh, yeah, I do that to my friends from Shanghai all the time. Like, my old military buddies, when they come to visit, I'll just take them out to Hot Pot and just watch them suffer. He's like, it's a part of the local tradition here.
Right?
I was like, see?
These people, like, Bupala, these other people.
Pabla.
Yeah, and then people in, like, Sichuan, Pabula. Like, they're afraid of stuff that isn't spicy. They're like, that's how spicy they need things.
So I grew up in Chongqing, right? I thought I could handle spicy, right? And so I went to Yunnan. I went to like Mangsi to see my friend, also for the water festival. So in Yunnan, their specialty is a guoqiao mi xian, the special vermicelli rice noodle. And they have
that here in New York now, amazingly.
Yeah, and they have so they actually put the spice on the side, and you can just like grab for yourself, right? So being from Chongqing, I'm like, I can do spice, you know. I'm gonna get everything. I just put a lot of spice in my noodles. And at the end, I was crying because they have these like really like small pepper, like 小辣椒, the Yunnan pepper. Like, oh my god, I put too much, like, because the soup was actually very delicious, right? But because I put so much pepper in it, I couldn't drink the soup at all. It was too much even for me. And I learned that lesson. I think I upload a video to that effect. I said, I learned my lesson. No more pepper for me.
Oh, the man from Chongqing was humbled by the peppers of Yunnan.
Yeah.
How's the music in Chongqing?
Oh.
There's like a big hip-hop scene, right?
There is. So oddly enough, in Chongqing, both Chongqing and Chengdu, there's happening hip hop scene. People can go on Vice, go on YouTube. I think Vice China did a documentary on the trap music of China, with focus on Chongqing and Chengdu. They have some pretty amazing music. I'm a fan.
It can't compete with the Bianlian stuff, though. I still like that. Have you seen that before? I'm still amazed by that stuff. I'm like, how did they do it? How did they do it? Yeah. So we're at about a little over an hour. Diana, any last thoughts or closing questions for Carl?
I guess like what do you plan for the future? Like, it seems like, are you on a information gathering? Like, do you plan to do something with what you've learned in the trip that you're taking right now, or like, do you have some ideas happening?
Actually, when I first came to China, I have zero plans, and now that some people on Twitter are suggesting, they would like to see, like something more. I'm thinking maybe I'm probably would like to at least output some videos of my travels in China, and I would do more podcast episodes on my podcast to talk about my experiences in China and what I've seen, and just some of the perception that how it changed my own perceptions by my China travels.
Oh, looking forward to that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Carl. It was really good to finally be able to connect, figure out a time to do it, and it seems like you got a lot ahead of you. So best of luck to you on the rest of your trip, man.
Thank you for inviting me to the show.
That's our episode for this week. Make sure to hit subscribe and give us a rating on iTunes if you haven't already. That's the biggest thing you can do for us if you enjoy the pod. Please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/planamag. Contributions go into a fund to pay for Asian American writing, which we'll publish on our website, planamag.com. See you next week.